On to our next story. This was supposed to be the day that the Egyptian military cracked down on pro-Morsi supporters. Well, it did not happen. Egyptian authorities on Monday postponed a move to disperse 2 Cairo sit-ins, saying it would be, quote, it wanted to rather, quote, avoid bloodshed. Egyptian security forces appear to have backed off reported plans to begin clearing out protester campsites. Supporters of former President Mohamed Morsi have been protesting his ouster for weeks. Despite multiple reports that police would move in this morning, nothing happened and the protests remained peaceful. Arizona Senator John McCain visited Egypt last week to meet with military leaders and urged them to refrain from violence when confronting the protesters. Sunday, he said a violent crackdown of peaceful protesters could lead to a big loss for Egypt's military.
If they go ahead and crack down in a violent way, are you going to call for a cutoff of aid to Egypt?
I'm afraid that the Congress of the United States would have to consider carefully the elimination of aid.
Egypt has received billions of dollars in aid from the U.S., in part because it helps keep the peace along the border with Israel, a key U.S. ally in the region. Joint Chiefs Chairman Martin Dempsey is scheduled to arrive in Tel Aviv today to discuss the security situation in Egypt with his Israeli counterparts. The United States has condemned the bombings in Iraq over the weekend that killed at least 80 people. As more bombs exploded Monday, al-Qaeda's branch in Iraq claimed responsibility for the killings and warned the government to stop arresting suspected militants or face more violence. It has been one of the deadliest Ramadan holidays in years in Iraq, where Sunni Islamist militants are waging an insurgency against the Shiite-led government. For more on the bombings in Iraq and the crisis in Egypt, Arise News Foreign Affairs correspondent Brian Palmer is with us. If I can spit that out, we got a lot to talk about. Welcome, Brian.
Hi, Debbie. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Now, it appears that the military was ready to crack down. The whole world, the media was there waiting and watching, and it didn't happen. Why didn't it happen, and is this just a postponement of something that's inevitable?
To the second question first, I would say it's most likely a postponement. To the first question, as you said, people were waiting for this to happen because of leaks, and this may be why the move did not happen now. This is an incredibly fluid and volatile situation. I mean, I'm watching my screen as just the news pops up. There was apparently pro-Morsi supporters marched on the High Constitutional Court, presumably to protest the continued detention, the extension of the detention of President Morsi, but then they backed off. Now there's an announcement that Muslim Brotherhood turned down the offer to mediate by the head of Sunni Muslim, the top religious organization in the world. So both sides are essentially nose to nose with their weapons drawn at this point. And this is an existential crisis, I think, for both of them.
Indeed, and this is an update that you're just telling me, because I was planning on asking you. There have been meetings recently, discussions between international envoys and all sides. So the Muslim Brotherhood has turned down this opportunity to meet. So what alternative does it lead them to find a way out of this?
Again, I don't know if it leaves any room at this very moment for a negotiated settlement. There's another meeting going on now, apparently among the military and the military-backed government. This could be about the impending crackdown, or it could be about something else. But as far as I know, it does not involve representatives from the Muslim Brotherhood.
You know, does this now involve sort of saving face, if you will, this impasse of who's not going to blink first, which to me makes it all the more dangerous?
As I said, I would say yes to that, but I would also say the stakes are enormously high. The Muslim Brotherhood had been angling for power as an alternative to what they saw as the corrupt secular government for years and years. They've been around for darn near 100 years. Here they were, their candidate was elected president, and then he was deposed. On the other side, the military has been the foe of the Muslim Brotherhood. They represent secularist-backed government and military-backed government, generally speaking. So I think it's a lot more about face. I think it's about more than face. I think it's about resources. I think it's about power. I think it's about a lot of things.
You know, we've talked a lot about this $1.4 billion that the U.S. has pledged in aid to Egypt, and why Egypt is so important to us in terms of our own national security. Now that we've reached sort of this new impasse, if you will, I don't know how new you can really call it, but this impending threat of a military intervention, does that perhaps change, or should it change the resolve of the U.S. to allow Egypt to solve its own problems, or does this perhaps give us a greater motivation to step in somehow?
Well, as John McCain was saying, if violence, serious violence happens again, because it's already happened, then we may have to reconsider the weapon sales, or actually the money that we give Israel to buy weapons from the United States. But the Senate voted to continue those weapon sales. So who knows? That's a piece of leverage that the U.S. has that the U.S. has not chosen to exercise.
Going to be interesting to see what happens there. Let's turn the corner just a little bit. Of course, there has just been horrendous violence in Iraq, back to, as I understand it, 2008 levels. Are we headed back that way to how bad it was then?
One could say, I would hope not, that one being me. I would definitely hope that that is not the case. But it looks like this is part of a global resurgence by al-Qaeda. I think it's connected to the closing of consulates and embassies, which are just recently opened up by the U.S. It's related to prison breaks. Al-Qaeda and its affiliates broke 500 people out of jails in Iraq and about 1,000 out of Libya. They've changed, they've morphed since the U.S. has gone after the leadership. They've given a lot more, they've devolved more power down to local levels. And these operations are distributed, but they are incredibly sophisticated. So the situation in Iraq, I think, is incredibly volatile.
Indeed, and it almost seems, almost seems hopeless from my point of view. And, you know, where does the U.S. have leverage, if at all, in this situation? I mean, you know, Obama ran on a campaign of getting our troops out of Iraq. We ended the war there and, you know, got our people out of there, still doing that. But where's the leverage that we might have some sort of positive effect?
Well, I don't think we ended the war there. We just kind of pulled out. And I think a lot of people would say...
Or our presence, I should say.
But I think a lot of people would say the reason that the violence has resurged, so to speak, was because the U.S. pulled out. It's more likely that the violence was dormant until the U.S. pulled out. So at this point, I don't know what leverage the United States has. This has to be, as in Egypt, as in every other country, in the interests of the parties to the conflict in the country, to settle their disputes. And this may be something that takes a very, very long time, because both Sunni and Shiite, who happen to be in the government now, happen to lead Iraq, have vested interest in kind of keeping the conflict going, because they want to crush the other side.
All right, our Arise News Foreign Affairs contributor, thank you so much, Brian Palmer. Good to see you.
Thank you.